Ah, there it is. It finally showed up. Good grief. So apparently I've been messing around with the USB ports this past week and had forgotten that the microphone was not plugged in. And if it's not plugged in and you start the software, then it doesn't recognize the microphone anymore, even when you plug it in. But I think this works. Kirill misses the tech talk, the camera, the lenses. Yeah, I know. It's a very small, let's say, portion of my audience that was, into all the tech thingies. So I have to make choices. It's also because I've been gathering an audience for over 15 years. And so it is a mix of so many different people, so many different backgrounds. Am I live on another day than usual? I don't think so. It's Tuesday. And so I always go live on Tuesdays. Yeah, I do actually. At least for the past months I was, but maybe it's because of Pentecost. That kind of messes with your kind of internal clock. At least over here in the Netherlands it does, because usually the second day of Pentecost is also a holiday. And so usually that derails my sense of time and place. I was like, today is what day? But I think I hope I will get used to it. One of the things that has changed compared to the past is that I now work with very strict calendar. How do you say that? Like strict, not really schedules, but every day has its own tasks and its own things that I do. And I've noticed that as long as I keep going back to those routines, I react better to kind of special days like Pentecost and that sort of stuff, or vacations. So normally the things that I dislike the most are weekdays that are different from regular weekdays. Uh, I probably am a little bit autistic, or a little bit much. So and the Catholic Church is great at that sort of stuff. Like Ascension in the middle of the week, like on a Thursday. Why? Or second day of Easter. Second day of Easter, second day of Christmas. That sort of stuff is just completely derails me. So even on those days, I usually just stick to my rhythm. So for instance, on the second day of Easter, I just snapped back into my usual routine. I just worked. And I didn't do what most people do, and that is to take the day off. Because it just helps me to stay productive and to, um, yeah, just stay calm. So yesterday was a bit different because it was the second day of Pentecost, which, the Netherlands is one of the few countries in the world where they may have turned that into a holiday. I still don't understand why, because even liturgically it doesn't make sense, because there is no second day of Pentecost. But since it was a holiday in the Netherlands, I saw that there was a fantasy festival in a city not that far from here. And since I already had to go for a training walk, because in, what is it, 5 weeks from now, I'm going to do this big walking event. I originally planned on just walking to that city, which would be about 30 kilometers. How many miles is that? 20 something? 30 kilometers is... Oh, it's 18.6 miles. And so I figured, you know what, I'm just going to travel there and go hang out with the fantasy people there. There would be a few authors. I had no idea what to expect, actually. But then I realized on yesterday morning that I was still very tired from the weekend because obviously I've got mass on Sunday, and that mass plus pastoral conversations afterwards usually takes quite a toll on me. So I wasn't fully rested. And I also realized, well, if I'm going to be uh, out of my house for an entire day, it means I have to put stuff up in. I have to schedule my posts because I have this daily story thing. So I needed to figure out how to schedule a story on Substack. And then I realized, well, you know what? Not only do I have to schedule the story, I also have to schedule the social media posts that point to that story. Long story short, I was sitting here in my pajamas at 6 o'clock in the morning and only left the house at 9, which is extremely late. And so I walked for about 3 hours, I think. 3-4 hours, and then I decided, you know what, I'm never going to make it in time if I keep walking to Nijmegen. So I'll just hop on the train in Arnhem and go to the Fantasy Festival afterwards, which I did, and still had a great time. We'll talk about it a little bit more later in this live stream. And then I came home very, very tired because it's just the entire afternoon. I've been talking to people, and it was inside a church, or a former church. So there was a lot of echo and just very fatiguing to have conversations when there's a large crowd in an echoey space. And so today I've been a zombie. I'm still a zombie, as you can tell. I'm still like half asleep. And at least now I know that this is not laziness or just physical fatigue. This is just because I've had 2 days in a row with lots of social interaction, and that just causes overwhelm. And then I just need to wind down. I need a few days where I don't have any appointments. So this is kind of like a live stream is borderline. Like I can manage, but it's also because I don't care if I am not entirely the high energy Father Roderick that you're used to. I used to care a lot about that, but I don't. I can't afford, because then this will wipe me out even more. But for the next couple of days, I'm not going to plan anything. I'm just going to sit here at my computer writing stories, and maybe in the evening watch some TV or play simple video games. And then, bit by bit, I'll start functioning again. But I'm so glad that I now finally know what causes this kind of fatigue and also what to do about it. So for those of you that are new, like I discovered last year that I have ADHD, just like most of my family, by the way, which would have been an indicator had it been diagnosed earlier. But anyway, that has turned everything upside down. I had to really rediscover how my brain works, how I work, what works for me and what doesn't work for me, and how to, still do what I need to do. But it's been an interesting adventure, and the more I learn, well, the more I experiment with it, the more I discover how to just kind of not be too overwhelmed, or how to kind of get back in the green. I posted a whole episode of the walk in which I explained this, where I used to be like always stressed, not when I was on camera, of course, but because then I'm like a version of myself. But there were lots of days, and it's just because I was always piling up the work, always super perfectionistic, people pleaser and everything, and that just wears you out. I would never take time for myself, never a day off. And now now that I know that is just the worst thing you can do for someone who has ADHD, I'm starting to rediscover kind of like the manual now, how I can stay sane. So I recorded an entire episode about that, how I can diffuse stress, or I rarely get stressed anymore like I used to for most of my life. And it's because I now know that if I start to be irritable, or I bump into stuff, or I get decision fatigue, where I'm like this morning, I'm standing in front of the fridge. I needed to have breakfast. And I just stared there. I was like, what am I going to eat? And it took me 15 minutes to make a decision. That's how I now know that I'm super overwhelmed and I need to kind of calm down. In the past, I would just berate myself. I would just, come on, why can't you function like normal people? And now I was like, well, I'm just a different kind of normal. Anyway, I won't bore you with all my ADHD stories. Let me go through your questions here real quick. I just want to say hi to everyone in the chat. We've got Mike, and Angeline is there too. Steve from San Diego. Kirill is there. Sam is here from Sweden. Let's see who else is there. Let's see. Kananga Rep has a question. On biblical scripture, how should we interpret Sodom and Gomorrah? My community says it's about homosexuality, but I know other fathers who... like your question breaks off here. But I guess... Well, I see what you mean. I see what you want to ask. It is... this is a passage that is often, unfortunately, misinterpreted. And even though I'm not a biblical scholar, I follow quite a few people who are. And kind of modern day interpretations have a much more nuanced perception of what that passage is about. It has been abused a lot by Christians and also Catholics, and that's still the case, to basically marginalize homosexual people with, how do you say that? LGBTQ plus people. Kind of like they're reading something in the text that is foreign to the kind of the way in which people understood sexuality in those days. And this is the problem when people are reading the Bible from the perspective of like, what in the Bible can we use to affirm our identity and our way of looking at the world? That is not a scientific approach to the Bible. That's not it's not a scholarly approach to the Bible. You always have to keep in mind that those stories have been written over the course of many, many centuries in very different cultural circumstances. And so you cannot just read like the literal text and then deduce and then say, hey, the Bible says this or that, and therefore. No, we negotiate with those texts and we study them and we look at the cultural context. But we also decide, what are we taking from those texts that we still apply today that are, fit kind of the narrative that we have, and what do we let go? There are lots of things in the Bible that we don't do anymore, and that we, everybody would say, well, that's the way people thought back then. We don't think like that anymore. But with these moral issues, I think we're still in this kind of transitional period where our whole understanding of the Bible is changing. But also our whole understanding of homosexuality and all these different ways in which people define themselves, feel attracted to other people, or there is so much progress in psychology, but let's not forget also in moral theology. There's a lot of research that's being read and that's being processed right now, and I'm all for it. I'm all for, just before we judge, let's first listen, let's first explore, let's first study. And that is true for when it comes to, sexuality and just psychology and all that. But also when it comes to Bible studies. This is why the Catholic Church, at least, is very much in favor of like serious scholarly research on not just the Bible, but also the cultures in which the Bible was formed. So, as far as I understand it, but again, I'm not a scholar. You can, or a lot of biblical scholars today interpret the passage about Sodom and Gomorrah to be about hospitality, because this is about sexual abuse very clearly, but the moral point that the text is trying to make is that if you mistreat guests or foreigners to the extent of abusing them sexually and mistreating them, that is what the text wants to condemn. And the reason that a lot of modern scholars say this is, and again, this is just my understanding of that research, is that the whole concept of like homosexuality in the way that we would describe it today, or that even Christians now would define it, was kind of foreign to the way they looked at human relationships. And so even the way that and again, you can't really say it's the entire Bible or the entire biblical culture. We're talking about, again, centuries of culture and understanding, and but just the whole way that we look at sexuality today, both from a, let's say, sociological, biological, psychological point of view, as well as from a Christian or Catholic point of view, is completely different from the way in which people looked at sexuality and relationships between, male and female in the times that these texts were written. And so it requires a very nuanced study and debate also, let's be honest. And unfortunately, a lot of pastors that preach have either had very lousy education, and that let's call it for what it is. They didn't really study at universities. They just had like a seminary formation, and we're talking about people that are now pastors that have been formed 30 years ago. Like me, I was like, my seminary university education is more than 30, what is it? Yeah, almost 30 years ago. And so there's so much new research that I am not aware of. Thankfully, I have time to read, but most of my colleagues don't. They just run around kind of managing churches. And so this is why we need scholars. This is why we need ongoing research and ongoing academic debate. And I try to follow as much as I can, but the more I read and the more I learn, the more careful I am in, what I preach. And this is not about moral relativity, but it's about a deeper understanding that does justice to the Bible, but also does justice to, the whole width of our current academic research when it comes to who we are and what makes us tick. That's a very long answer, and I'm a little bit tired, so maybe it's a bit fuzzy, but that's what I would say to that question. Sam asks, if you miss church on a day of obligation because you read the calendar wrong, do you have to go to confession? No. It's a venial sin, or if you're breaking a church law, right? So you can always bring it up in confession next time, but it's not a mortal sin. It's just a mistake, right? 30 kilometers is 3 Swedish miles. Oh, really? Wow. Hey, Marianne, good to see you. If a person commits a sin but doesn't believe it's a mortal sin, is he guilty of committing it or not? If he disagrees with the church, if certain sins are not a mortal sin, what does the church say? This is a good question. I would say from a Catholic perspective, there are two things. Obviously, our most important moral guideline is our conscience. And so we cannot go against our conscience. However, the Catholic Church specifies that we should be open to have our conscience be educated by the Church. And so it's an informed conscience that should guide us. But of course, education takes time. Insight takes reflection and maybe even debate and discernment. And so in these cases, it's maybe from a moral point of view, you can make it very black and white, because the Catholic Church will say, well, sin itself is not a relative thing. It is not the intention alone that determines whether an act is sinful or not. If someone loves to murder and loves to kill people, the church is never going to say, well, yeah, well, that person doesn't think it's a problem, so just go ahead. You see, this is an extreme example, but it kind of shows you that from a kind of moral principle point of view, you cannot say, well, it's all relative. It all depends on how you think about those acts. But in practice, I'm always all for just take time to reflect on the situation, listen to your conscience, make room for that, bring it up to God as well. That's a very good way to inform your conscience. Ask for, to be enlightened. And you just asking the question here is also a way for you to kind of search clarity on that. And that's all good. That's all very positive. Those are all steps toward, insight and clarity and trying to do the right thing. But I always say, well, in case of doubt, just bring it up with in confession. And confession is not just like, okay, I did this and this and this and this, and then just like, get me out of here. No, this can also be there's lots of room to just have a conversation and bring that up and say, well, I don't know. I look at this from a different angle than maybe the Catholic Church does, or what I think the Catholic Church actually says, because that might also be not entirely clear. And just have a conversation about that. But what is most important is that when it comes to sin, it's always this desire to do the right thing, even if in practice, sometimes you may wonder, what falls into this category. But if the will is there to keep a good relationship with the people around you and with God, and it's very hard to break that relationship, and so I find it, at least it helps me a lot, to always look at questions of sin and circumstances from a relational perspective. I think that's actually more helpful than only looking at it. I mean, there has to be a moral discourse as well, obviously. But in the pastoral situations, even in confession, I always ask people, so what has that done to your relationship with God? Or if it's a thing between people, how do you feel about that other person? And that is much more important to talk about than just like, did you do this? Okay, here's the fine. And did you do that? That's I think 20 Hail Marys. That's a very legalistic way. I mean, there is room for that. There's certainly aspects of the sacrament of confession that pertain to that domain. You have to have clear rules, and the church needs to discern. But on the other hand, most people don't struggle that much with the infraction, but they suffer from the results of that. What did that do to my relationship with God? What did that do to my relationship with people around me? And how can I fix that? And can God help me to heal me so that maybe that also heals the relationship? Another long answer. What otherwise is a grave sin has to be done knowingly and by choice. True. It's true. It never hurts to confess, even if you worry. And, for a confessor, me as a confessor, I'm not going to say, oh, you did this, and then, okay. No, I something that I learned from Pope Francis is just say you understand. Just listen and nod and say, I understand. Even if part of your mind does not understand. But that's not what it is about. This is about a soul that opens up to God and wants to mend a relationship. And we understand that sometimes relationships may suffer, may get hurt, may break a little bit. But we also know that God is the relationship manager of the universe. So there's nothing that is broken that can't be fixed if we allow God to do that. Carol wants to know how I use ChatGPT to turn my speech to different kind of texts. That's a good question. I use ChatGPT on different levels. So I mean, this could fill an hour, but I'm just going to keep it short. One of the things that I use ChatGPT for is when I go out in the woods and I record a text. Like, for instance, I record The Walk, which is an hour-long podcast. I have no time to sit down and to kind of create show notes. I barely remember what I talked about. So there I make a transcript. I do that locally on the computer. I don't use ChatGPT for that, but a Mac program called Mac Whisper, because that's an LLM, so a large language model. It runs locally on my computer, so none of that content gets uploaded or scraped for information. And in ChatGPT, I've also turned off all the settings where it uses my data for, to improve their model. But what I would then do is just like, so I create a project for stuff like that. And I say, hey, these are the parameters of what I want you to do within this project. I'm going to feed you a very raw transcript. It's just me, stream of conscience about lots of things. I want you to kind of condense that into a 3-paragraph text where you highlight the most important things, just leave out all the details about dogs pursuing me in the woods and that sort of stuff, because that always happens. But and try to, this is kind of the audience, so make sure that you highlight the themes in there that you think are important for my audience, and then it just generates a text, and I can just usually I look through it and was like, okay, maybe I would say this differently. I make a few adjustments and then I post it, and it saves me hours of work. So that's one thing. It's just basically summarizing big chunks of dictated text. I do that slightly differently when I dictate stories. So the way I come up with stories is I try to tell it as if I'm telling the story to a friend, but I'm making it up as I go. So there are oftentimes like I think of something and wait a minute, I want in the beginning this needs to happen as well, and now my story is here, so let's put some foreshadowing there. So it's a bit of a mess. I mean, the story in itself is very clear in my mind, but the way I dictate it is a bit messy. And so then I asked ChatGPT, okay, so now take this transcript, but also reorder it so that it becomes a consistent story. And then that gives me kind of an overview of the story. And then on the basis of that, I can start writing the edited version. But it's super helpful to have at least one consistent overview, because sometimes I just forget details that I mentioned. And so, for instance, when I like the way I write stories is usually very descriptive. I like all the sensory details, like how something smells or how it makes you feel, or like associations that I have. And so, but those come to me as I kind of picture the scene. But the moment my story is over, I've already forgotten my association. So for that, ChatGPT has been gold. It's been so useful to retain all those ideas that I had and then to present them to me in a way that I can work with it. So that's another way in which I use it. I also created some projects where it's more of a coaching, let's say a coaching analysis or a coaching approach. So you can basically tell ChatGPT what kind of part of its LLM it should tap into. And so I say, for instance, in the project, I say, for this project, I want you to behave like, or I want you to talk like, or act like. And then I can just say, for instance, if I need kind of a virtual sparring partner to think about marketing, like I'm juggling a lot of different channels. I'm juggling, all these YouTube channels and TikTok and now Substack and then Facebook, and it's just a lot. And of course, I'm already pretty chaotic myself. So in order to stay sane, I created a project where every week, in fact, I still have to do that today because Tuesday is usually the kind of how do you say that, the assessment day, where I share what I'm doing, also what I would like to do. And I've fed it information about, what are my long-term goals? What do I want to accomplish over time? For who do I do this? What are the problems that I'm struggling with? Like, for instance, I still don't really know how to monetize the stories. But I need to, because I still have some gaps in my budget. And so I feed all that in there, and then I tell it, I want you to act like a seasoned marketeer with 20 years of experience on like internet marketing, social media, but you're working in the kind of the nonprofit sector. So this is not about hard cash. It's about helping people, but also to make that sustainable. So I add a lot of details. And I basically paint a picture of someone that I would like to work with if I would hire such a person. So it's basically a job description. And then sometimes I tell it, hey, I'd like, for instance, for Tuesdays, I have this one chat where I say, every Tuesday, I want you to ask me a few questions. Just assessment questions. Where am I? What worked well? Where did I struggle? What didn't work? What make me feel good? And then on the basis of that, I want you to just let me know how I'm doing and if there's anything I'm losing track of. And if you see any potential for things that maybe I could do. And then on the basis of, then I just answer a few questions, and then it gives me an assessment. And then we just go back and forth. And we're like, okay, so what do you think of this? Or what do you think of that? Or how could you optimize this? I've also stipulated, make sure that you answer in a way that works with people with ADHD, because that requires a very different approach than neurotypical people. So it means that ChatGPT, if it proposes something, it immediately says, since you have ADHD, this is how I would break it down. This is what I would do in any case, and this is optional if you have energy or not, and then so and this is what I would not do if I were you. And that is just extremely helpful. All this is based obviously on a lot of collected information about kind of all the roles that it emulates, but I've noticed there are huge differences between the various projects that I use. Like if I'm working with a project that is more focused on, I don't know, ideation, coming up with wild ideas, and then that's a very different project than like, okay, I got all this stuff, all these things on my to-do list and in my head, I'm worried about this. Now help me break it down and help me to wade through this swamp of confusing ideas. So that's super helpful. I don't use it yet for research. I know that is actually a very popular way of using ChatGPT, is to just let it do like deep dive research. And it's mostly because I like to do that kind of research myself. So I like to just mess around and just go and read Wikipedia pages and just like wander around on the internet. I don't need, like, the way in which I learn is very much like, it's very by association. Like when I was preparing the course on Irish saints, I just, one story leads to another, and then I find a video, and then I go from that video to the website of the Dominicans, and I find this study, and I like that process. For me, that's the fun of learning. It's not just to have data, but it's also to figure out stuff. And that is also true for kind of creative tasks. I had a whole conversation about this yesterday on the Fantasy Festival. If you've been to my Substack page, you see that I use like AI generated images, kind of like these oil painting like things. And I just use Bing for that. It's the feature of Copilot, so it's Microsoft. It's free. It's adequate. It's not ideal, but hey, it does the job. And I know that in order for for my stories to have more of an impact, you need to have an image. And of course, a lot of my stories are imaginary stories, so I can't just go and look for on Pixabay for copyright-free images, because where am I going to find an image of a dragon? But I had this conversation with two Dutch authors, and they both said, I kind of don't want to follow you on Instagram. I mean, really appreciate what you're doing, and we have a great rapport, but I don't want my news feed to be filled with AI generated stuff, because we are artists and we know that this AI basically it's the end of art, and so both of them are also painting. They're writers, but they're also painters, and so they just sell less of their art because people say, well, I can just get it from AI, and so they both encouraged me. They said, we would rather see something that you just drew yourself, even if it's crappy, but it's you, right? Rather than all this slick AI generated imagery. And I gave it a lot of thought, and I'm still kind of thinking about it, because I think they're right. I think there is part of this creative process that, yeah, obviously you can ask an AI to do that for you, but then there are two things that you're missing out on. One is just learning yourself is progress. AI can make you very lazy, and if you have to do something yourself, if it's hard, that's how you learn and you get better over time. It's like cooking. You can go to a restaurant and have a wonderful meal, and you can do that for the rest of your life and have fantastic meals, but you will not be able to cook yourself. Now, I love cooking, but I wasn't very good at it. A couple of years ago, I couldn't, well, I could take care of myself, but what I do now is, like, every time I see a cooking video on TikTok, I'm going to try that out in the kitchen. And sometimes it works and sometimes it's a disaster. But I'm getting better every month. And it's so much fun. And when I had this conversation, it was a bit painful because I felt also a bit guilty that I was using AI, because they obviously see the darker side of that. For them, art is their income, and if everybody just uses AI, then it's the end of art. So I felt a bit bad about that. On the other hand, I also told myself, my focus right now is learning how to tell stories. I'm at the very beginning of my writing career. So I cannot do everything at once. And the same is true for my own life. With ADHD, I can only focus on a few things and try to do them really well, and the rest will just have to wait. If I am standing in front of the fridge and I have decision paralysis, you know what? I'll just grab something and put it in a microwave and eat that. I'm not going to cook because I'm already having a hard time. And so for me right now, for me, it's more important to maintain that daily writing, how do you say that, procedure, or habit. And then, yeah, I'll just have a temporary picture up there that is AI. If I ever have the time and the resources to publish my book, then yeah, part of my budget will be for artists to make a nice cover and maybe even some illustrations on the inside. And I'm actually already gathering like addresses and contact info of artists whose work I like. I would never want to publish a book where everything is all the art is done by AI. But for now, my priority is having this daily routine. And let's be honest, I think and I'm very much willing to learn how to draw. When I was in high school, I loved doing that. I made a lot of comics when I was young. And I think I already have some talents that could really work. I have a very good eye for composition because I worked in television, photography. I have a very good idea of color and composition and all that. And so that can already help a lot. But, having to learn how to use an app on my iPad and working with oil paint and whatnot, I have no experience with that. Not even with the real material, so let alone doing it digitally. I think I can learn it, but it will take a long time. And I really want to give myself the opportunity to take my time to learn that before I start boasting that stuff. And so, anyway, that's kind of the internal debate that I've had since yesterday. Anything else I can say about AI? Well, as a non-native English speaker, it's also really helpful. And I don't use ChatGPT for that. I use Copilot because it has a little window on my screen where I can always quickly ask it something. When I formulate something, I will always, if it's something important, right? I'll just run it through Copilot and say, hey, can you look at this? Is this the way you say this in English? And then sometimes it will say, yeah, it was fine. Or it will offer some suggestions. And for me, that's a valuable source of information. I used to be, long before AI, I would just ask my followers. I even had a segment in my podcast for years, which was basically correct me if I'm wrong. And I would get this audio feedback. You use this word, but actually this is not how you use that word. And people would correct me. And that's how I learned a lot of English. And it helped me to perfect my English. Well, why not use an AI to do that? It's faster and it's very helpful. As long as the intent is it's not something I want to outsource, but I can definitely use some help to get better at stuff. Hope that answers your question. The more tired I am, the longer my chats become. I'm grateful, Aaron, that you like me even if I have low energy. The whole interpretation, by the way, to go back to that Sodom and Gomorrah thing, angels is also a concept that has an evolution in the Bible. So there's not just one definition of an angel, a biblical angel. No, angels have very different roles, and they are also in a story or in a biblical text, they have various functions. It's often because people couldn't really bring God into the story because God was the one God, he's too big for our stories. And so let's put something in between. That's often how angels become messengers. They translate what God wants and bring that message to the people in the story. So again, this is why biblical theology and biblical studies are so fascinating, because there's a whole world that most people that read the Bible have no idea exists, but it informs you so much about the original intent of the biblical stories, but also prevents us from jumping to conclusions too quickly just because it's written in the Bible. Not to mention all the translation problems, but we rarely ever read the original texts. So even translations can give us the wrong ideas. Why does Lot offer his own daughter to be abused by the villagers? Yeah, good question. Good question, because it's a story from a very different culture and a very different time. I mean, look at Noah. No, most people only know Noah from the children's books. But if you look at what Noah did, it's like, dude, that guy would be in prison right now. It's a horrible. I mean, it's just insane. And he's not the only one. There's a lot. Like yesterday at the entrance to the festival, there were a number of Protestants, and they were literally protesting. They were doing what their titles, they're Protestants, protesting, and they were literally yelling at all of us who were going into the church for the festival, and like, you're going to hell, and this is all the devil, and I was like, oh my goodness, how incredibly short-sighted can you be, and how and their whole vision is like the Bible is the literal truth and everything else is wrong. And I'm thinking, have you even read the Bible? If you're pointing to so-called witches and monsters and you think that is scary, have you even read the Bible? Look at all the horrible stuff that happens in the Bible. The only way you can read the Bible is if you look at it and just kind of push away everything that doesn't fit your narrative. And I think that's a very dishonest way of reading the Bible. Because then basically what you do is the Bible is no longer talking to you, but you use the Bible to fit your narrative, conveniently leaving out everything you don't like. That's how you get Christian nationalism. That's how you get the situation now in the United States. It is like large groups of evangelicals that use the Bible as a weapon, as a reason for them to discriminate, to exclude people, and they're contradicting the same Bible. It's like, but this is why scholarly research is so important. This is why science is so important. This is why it's so important for the churches, Catholic Church, but also all other Christian churches, to have an open mind and to first study and listen and debate before you judge. Maybe that's why Jesus said, don't judge, because the measure you use for other people is going to be the measure that is going to be used for you. I think that was prophetic. What do I think of Pope Leo? He's a very calm pope. Sometimes I'm thinking he's a little bit boring because he's always reading his text. I mean, he means well, but he's not the charismatic personality that we had in John Paul II or Pope Francis. And maybe that's a good thing. After after John Paul II, we had Pope Benedict, who was also not very charismatic, very calm, very academic. But maybe that was, at the time, a good thing. And now after all the upheaval and all the, stormy stuff around Pope Francis, maybe now Pope Leo is just the right person to just calm everything down and make sure that everything is, that everybody comes together. But my overall impression is he's a very kind man, very gentle. Reminds me a little bit of Paul VI. I still have a bit of trouble kind of relating to his style, but it's probably because my brain is a bit more like, Pope Francis. I'm more of a squirrel. All right. Let me see some other questions. Is it normal to both love and fear confession? I dread it after every time, and afterwards I feel so much better. Yes, that's totally normal. Ask the Pope. Ask any priest. We all have that. And it's like the fear is not because you fear the priest or God. It's actually what you fear the most is your own vulnerability. You make yourself extremely vulnerable. You open your heart. And, there's always part of us that is like, it's difficult to accept your flaws and weaknesses. It's difficult to love yourself when you know that you do stuff that is wrong, or that you don't, how do you say that you're not the person that you'd like to be. And so it's already hard to admit that to yourself, let alone kind of open yourself up to someone else. But the thing you always have to keep in mind is that every priest also knows the other side of confession and knows that vulnerability and has felt it as well. So most cases, confessors are very mild, gentle people. There are exceptions, by the way. Sometimes you have confessors that kind of lack bedside manners, let's put it that way. But, priests are humans as well. In that case, I would always recommend go find another priest. Don't stay with people that are too harsh, too judgmental. And thankfully, they're very rare. But, yep. It's such a vulnerable situation. It just requires a lot of gentleness and a lot of comprehension and a lot of kindness. And, if you find someone who has that demeanor, stick with that confessor, but it can be hard to find a good one. And sometimes it's just, you're just limited in terms of, who is available and who is in your vicinity. Freddie says, I'm going to write a book with you as Lou's inspiration for a villain. Is that okay with you? Of course, that's okay. After all, I am your father. You use any inspiration. I'm not insulted. Terrell wants to know, what kind of advice would you want to give for future seminarians? Wow, that's a good question. I often think I wish I could go back in time and talk to my former self when I entered seminary. Because, of course, I don't know seminarians. The only seminarian that I can talk to is myself. And I would say a couple of things. First of all, I would say be a happy person. Try to always focus on the positive. Take every struggle, every obstacle, every moment of tension. Take that as tell yourself that you're there to grow and to learn. You don't have to be perfect. You don't have to be a saint. In fact, seminarians that pretend to be saints and are too devout, I always have I'm always thinking, that's a cover-up. That is not normal. Seminarians are beginners. And so it's totally normal to be bad at stuff and to have to learn stuff and to fall asleep during prayer and to not show up early in the morning because you've been working for an exam the evening before. Unfortunately, I've had too many presidents that couldn't deal with that. And they just felt like, well, why can't they all be like me? Specifically one president that I had, which had a tendency to do that. Not realizing that he himself was kind of a certain type of character that I would, even if they would pay for me, I wouldn't want to be like him. But that was the way he looked at me. And I wish they had a more understanding for the fact that, I would have never entered seminary if I wasn't of goodwill, and oftentimes I felt judged just because I didn't fit the mold. I would say if you be yourself, have patience with yourself, and never mingle with the people that are negative. That's something I've never done in my entire seminary formation. There were always students who were constantly criticizing the Pope and and what in their eyes were weak priests and just always judgmental. Sometimes you were sitting at their table and I was like, oh, can't wait for this to be over, because it poisons the soul. And as a priest, as a future priest, you're supposed to be someone who brings joy and hope. How can you do that when your heart is always complaining? So anyway, you become the people that you surround yourself with, and that's true for seminary as well. So go look for the seminarians and the priests that surround you, that you feel and your conscience is going to guide you, where you feel these are people that make me grow. These are people that I want to emulate. I want to be like them. And if you encounter people, and there will be tons of them, that maybe on the surface may seem very devout and very knowledgeable and intellectual, but you think they're, I don't like these people. I don't like to hang out with them. Stay away from them. You don't have to be friends with all of them. So that would be one thing. Another piece of advice would be read books, not just your study books. Read novels, read fantasy, read psychology. Whatever you feel makes you happy, informs you, gives you ideas, read it. I regret having read only the books that were compulsory. I wish I had continued to read just fiction and fantasy, because reading is, it's like, I can't imagine a life without reading anymore. And I deeply regret not having read for like the first 20 years of my priesthood. So read books. Have hobbies. That would be another advice. Don't let anyone tell you that seminary is all about praying and studying. The people that think that are usually not the people you want to become. So have hobbies. Be it movies, TV, Star Wars, whatever. Have hobbies. Do something creative from time to time. But don't fall for the trap that seminary is only about prayer and study. No, it's about your full development in all the aspects of your life. And if the problem is oftentimes that these seminaries and formation cycles, they're overloaded. And it's all well-intentioned, but there's way too much you have to study. There's not enough time to just be you. And that's kind of a problem that I can't solve. It's something systemic that I think is wrong about the way in which we form future priests. But I would say a general word of advice would be always protect your boundaries. Your boundaries are sacred, and if you don't learn to protect them during seminary, then you won't be able to defend yourself later on in a parish where it's going to be a lot harder. So protect your boundaries, even if that means that you sometimes have to break the rules. Even if that means that sometimes you just say no when someone else says, well, this is the rule. Yeah, so what? I'm not going to do it. Protecting your boundaries is like protecting your conscience. It's more important than what other people think you should do. You are the judge of that. So, yeah, I wish I had learned that when I was a seminarian. It would have saved me years of suffering. And on that optimistic note, I'm moving on to the next question. I need to start wrapping up because I need to stare at my fridge, wondering what I'm going to eat, and then just put a frozen pizza in the oven. Dominic is there too. Good to see you. What is new with me? Oh, I don't know. A bit of everything. Kingdom Sora is there. I'm okay. I'm just a little bit tired. Study Bibles are excellent as well. Let's see. God wants us to love and respect everyone. That's true. Even our enemies, which is kind of hard. But it means loving them from a point of view of Not judging them, not giving up on them, but at the same time, it doesn't mean that you always have to be close to your enemies. Sometimes you have to keep your distance, protect your boundaries. We don't take the Bible as a historical book with our clear evidence of it happening. Of course, the Bible is a collection of stories based on definitely a lot of historical events, but they're still stories, and it's not a journalistic account. I keep stressing that. It is all about realizing that the Bible is a book of faith. It's people looking with faith to what happened. And sometimes even to events that happened centuries before that, and that they only know through word of mouth. Obviously, oftentimes, not really knowing what happened, but then just creating a good story so it still carries truth. The truth in the Bible is different from just factual truth. My best advice for someone who is falling in love. Wow. I would first say enjoy the feeling, because it doesn't always happen. It's something wonderful. Talk about it with good friends. That would be my advice. If you have people that you trust, just, the times that you're in love in your life are incredible times of where you learn about yourself, you learn about others, you learn about life. Even if ultimately that love is not answered or you have a different calling in your life, these are still very precious moments, I would say. And so, yeah, if there are people in your life that you trust, and it can also be that loved one, it can be that other person, talk about it. And of course, always ask yourself also, love is one thing. It's a feeling. It's an emotion. It's also just psychology, biology. All those are factors in it. So never lose your mind. So always also take a step back. That's why sometimes it's very helpful to talk about it with someone else, so you can look at the situation. And because ultimately love is, if it's falling in love, it's the beginning of something. But it's not what love is going to look like years from now. And so allow yourself to grow in that love so that it deepens and becomes more real and becomes more than just a feeling or a physical attraction. But love is the beginning of an amazing adventure. Don't miss out on it. Don't close your heart, but at the same time, don't shut down your brain. I need to start wrapping up. Kirill wants to go back to seminary. You have already everything you need and more. How to deal with this debate about LGBTQ in a congregation? Well, it's basically what I shared earlier on in this stream. I would say, before you judge, listen, learn, be mild. Don't think that you understand everything. And for me, a very important pastoral attitude is always to be concerned not about the doctrine or, but take good care of the people that are struggling. Take good care, be supportive, be there as a friend of those that oftentimes suffer a lot from their situation and being judged by others and being excluded and feeling excluded. In my creative environment, like authors, artists, fellow geeks, there are a lot of neurodivergent people. And I've noticed that neurodivergence very often comes with being somewhere also on the spectrum of the LGBTQ community. And what I know they appreciate so much is that I have never broken a relationship after learning that people are gay or, are in a relationship or are going to a transition, trans people. I they're not asking me for, what is your opinion as a man of cloth? No, I try to be there just as someone who appreciates them as they are. And if they're not asking my advice, I'm not going to give it to them. Like what Pope Francis says, who am I? But there's a deeper reason even, and that is that I believe that the church still has a lot to learn in this domain, especially when it comes to the more recent research in psychology, neuropsychology, and neurodiversity. There's so much that I'm still learning. And I'm thinking, ethics, moral doctrine is one thing, but the church has obviously the obligation to study ethics and to form an opinion and guide people. And in order to guide people, you sometimes also have to enlighten people and give them your view. But at the same time, I think we as a church also have a very strong, important obligation to keep studying all these issues, because I feel that we have a lot to learn. Most moral theologians have not studied psychology or are up to date with their sociological, psychological, biological studies. And I think that's a big problem, because basically, like, there are bishops who write entire books about human sexuality. And I'm thinking, you're writing about, first of all, something that you're not supposed to know much about. And you're writing it purely from a theological point of view. But you've never even opened a book about psychology. And that, to me, makes it that a very shaky proposition. Because moral theology is one thing, but it also needs to be applied, and to apply it well, you need to know who you're talking with, and you need to have studied what their world and listened. And anyway, I feel like as a church, Christian churches still are so behind on the times, not because there's no room for ethics or moral judgment, but because I think that we have failed to do our research. And if you judge without knowing what you're talking about, then you're sometimes doing more harm than you do good. Now, as far as my congregation, thankfully, I have a very understanding congregation usually, so I don't encounter much intolerance or judgmental attitudes. Unfortunately, on the internet, oh my goodness, on Substack, for some reason, there are a lot of traditional Catholics that follow me, and when I read what they post about these topics, I'm thinking, oh my goodness, no wonder that so many people hate the church, because it's this attitude, this harshness in the way they judge. And usually also, it's not even, these people are not moral theologians. It's all about what they think the church says, without even knowing what the church says. And it's the same way in which people use the Bible. They use it as a weapon to hurt others, to establish their own secure little identity, fenced off community. But that's not what we're supposed to do as Christians. I'm on my soapbox again. Lego is a great hobby. Yes. I need to go to the pizza. I think so too. I agree with you about the whole LGTB. The letters are in different order in Dutch, so my brain is like, does not compute. But yeah, I think we still have to learn a lot. And one final thing in this whole debate is, most of the time Catholics just underestimate how much the abuse crisis has completely disqualified the church to talk about these matters. And I think there's still not enough introspection there. I think there is still a lot wrong with the way in which men are formed in the priesthood. And there's a lot wrong with the way in which supposedly celibate priests and bishops and whatnot, even the way in which they deal with their own sexuality. And so, good Lord, I've seen so many examples of priests that morally themselves are in a predicament. And so, but the tragic thing is that a lot of the people that are judgmental about others are hiding a struggle that they have themselves. And so the fear of others is sometimes a translation of the fear and sometimes the self-hatred that they have, the fear of facing themselves in the mirror. So then it's externalized. It's also a psychological coping mechanism. But the problem is it hurts other people, and it hurts them a lot. And I don't think that is acceptable. But then again, I can't change other people. The only thing I can do is to try to follow my conscience and try to do better, or try to behave differently. And I hope that works. I'll answer the question about Taoism some other time, because that would open another rabbit hole of conversations. But I appreciate you asking the question. I have not seen the movie Stalker yet, nor have I heard of it. Anyway, thank you so much for all your questions. And yeah, these are difficult debates, but I applaud you for doing that. And, we need to speak up. For most of my life, I was too scared to even talk about these topics, like on a public stream like this, because I was like, oh, the thought police is coming after me. And now I'm finally at a level of maturity where I'm thinking, you know what? If everybody refuses to talk about these issues, then nothing changes. And there's nothing wrong about asking questions. That's just normal. That's the way the church has always learned. So if we don't want to talk about stuff just because we're afraid that we're saying the wrong thing, and yeah, people will come after you anyway. People are coming after me and have been doing ever since my first tweet, But you just have to shrug and think, you know what? That's not my problem. Because I'm my job is to be a shepherd, especially of the people that are weak and excluded and threatened and hurt. I'm not called to be a shepherd of the people that think they have the moral high ground. And I've seen too much, also as a confessor, to know that people that say they have the high ground usually don't. If you have the high ground, you shouldn't feel the necessity to proclaim that. And so, yeah. It didn't make me cynical, but it does help to kind of shrug off the hardliners. I'm just so sad to see that there's so many of them among Catholics as well. And, well, the consequences for society and culture are dire. We see this every day on the news in the United States. So, yeah. Warrior Nun. I have checked out Warrior Nun. It's fun. It's a lot of fun. My pizza could be ready already. Thank you for the reminder. I appreciate it. Have a wonderful rest of your evening. Talk to you soon. And if you want to read a fun story about a kitten in Rome, it's a cute story. It breaks my heart. And I wrote it. Go check out the story on my Substack. It's brought me back to Rome. And kittens. Rome plus kittens. What's not to love? Talk to you soon. Take care.